In 1960, our federal debt was about 50%, 53% of our GDP. And that's really important. The number, people like to throw out, well, our federal debt now is approaching, it's right at $29 trillion, if I recall correctly. And that's before this $2 trillion bill that I'm sure is unfunded. But that number needs context for it to make sense, right? Like if I have a $2,000 mortgage, that means one thing if I make $40,000 a year. It means something completely different if I make $400,000 a year, right? Mm-hmm. Those are two completely different situations. And the federal debt is the same way. Some level of federal debt is almost necessary just to, for cash flow purposes. But in 1960, it was 53% of our GDP, or 53% of income would be a way to look at that. 1980, it had dropped to 35% of GDP. In 2000, it was way up to 59%. Somehow the peace dividend got us in tremendous amounts of debt.
When did it hit 59? I'm sorry, 2000?
Okay. Year 2000. 21 years later, the federal debt is 130% of our GDP. It is everything that the country produces and another third of that. That's how much the federal government owes. And again, that's before this $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. So that's going to shoot that up even more, obviously. What is fundamentally wrong with Congress that prevents it from taking action to rein in this ridiculousness? What is the thing or the few things that need to change in Congress to get them to stop mortgaging the future of this country?
Well, you could inversely tie the amount of money the value of their portfolios to the national debt such that as that comes down, they can have more money. Yeah. That's one thought. You could also do that with their salary or something like that. The problem is there's no, it's an eternal problem. There's no incentive to do anything about it because the gains are tangible in the moment, whether that's an Obama phone or a $1,200 stimulus check or whatever. And the payment for that is pushed way on down into the future. The problem is that the gain is just you're getting a super small payoff for what you're going to pay in the future, both in terms of the amount with interest, but also what it will do to the currency. In the Weimar Republic, they had 8 or 9 years of incredible inflation. 8 or 9 years of financial troubles, and then in 1 year, the mark got down to it went from the point that it was a viable currency to the point they were having to take wheelbarrows to get a loaf of bread.
It cost $1 million marks to mail a letter.
Yeah, so it's not you don't pay proportionately. For one thing, if you borrow $1 today, you don't just pay $1 later; you pay $1 plus interest. But it also turns out that it's not really paying $1 plus interest. It's paying almost an unpayable amount. It creates a catastrophe later on. And we're just kind of pushing the catastrophe back. And we can continue doing that for a while. If that's what we want to do, that's fine. But the longer you hold that back, the longer you pin that up, the worse it's going to be. How we get out of it, I'm not sure. You can devalue the currency and then, you fix that problem and then the dollar's not the reserve currency anymore.
Yeah, you got a whole other set of problems.
Yeah, and then your debt's no good. Of course, we only owe a couple of trillion and a trillion or two in foreign debt, I think. So maybe that's not that big a deal. But yeah, that's an enormous issue. And then what do you do with petrodollars? So I don't know the answer to this other than finding some way, and people have written about this, find some way to tie how Congresspeople, how lawmakers are compensated to how the economy is doing or how the national debt's doing. That's the only dadgum thing I can think of. Mm-hmm. And of course, that would have to be done by law.
Written by
And
Congress.
they're not going to do it.
Right.
So one super long answer to the question you asked, but maybe one thing to think about. One of the things that made the contract with America work was the idea that Gingrich and his crowd said, look, any law Congress passes will apply to Congress as well as everybody else. Doggone it, we're not going to exempt ourselves anymore. If you could get a movement like that among conservatives, then maybe you could get enough people in there who would say, oh, look, we're going to kind of stick it on the line here, and we'll run the risk of not getting paid what we thought we were going to get paid if we don't do our jobs. But that's there's only ever been one contract with America.
Right.
It's hard to pull off.
Deborah, if you could change
Yeah.
one thing about Congress to address some of this, what do you think it would be?
I think when I look at this, it points me back to the fact that we're beginning to allow more socialist principles into our country and into our leadership in Congress. And I think that our leaders that are now in a Democratic administration that for a period of time at least was being heavily influenced by progressives on the far left is beginning to take the mindset that the government should be able to give people whatever they want, whatever they need, whenever.
Right.
And that's not the principle that America was built on. And that's not, I don't believe that's not the standard that we want to strive for as a nation moving forward. And so I think that because of that, the current administration does not have any plans to limit the federal budget at all or to even have federal spending in the back of his mind. I think that for them, as the national debt continues to grow, maybe even by the minute, it's a problem that is far off, out of sight, out of mind for them.
Right.